Well, good afternoon. Welcome again to our 25th Annual Capital Conference, virtual edition. This is a session about our mathematics contest, overview and Q&A with our new state contest director for the mathematics contest. We also have sitting in with us today is Larry White, who is a longtime math and number sense director and continues as our state number sense director. And when Larry told me that he was thinking about stepping back a little bit and focusing just on number sense and wanting to get someone else on board to work with math, my first thought was, oh no, what are we going to do? But then I was quite thrilled that we were able to bring Cliff McCurdy on board to step in as our new state contest director for mathematics. If you've been around UIL math and science competition for any length of time, or TMSCA competition as well, you probably know Cliff. He had an outstanding career as an educator and multiple time state champion coach as well. So we are thrilled to have him on board as our new state contest director for mathematics. And I will turn the session over to Cliff.
Thank you, David. My name is Cliff McCurdy. Do you guys all have a handout in front of you? And I'd like to go through that with you. If you have a question or comment, there's my email address. And I just request that coaches only email me. My classroom experience, I've taught school for 40 years. I started at Evans Junior High in Lubbock. Then I went up in the Northeast Panhandle to Canadian High School. Then I came to North Texas area, spent 7 years at Valley View Middle School, then moved up to the high school for 7 years. Then I spent my last 16 years at Argyle High School. During this time, I've taught Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, Pre-Calculus, AP Calculus, BC, and AP Statistics. So on the test this year, I hope to have several questions from each of these 6 courses. As far as UIL experience, I got started at Canadian, and I was the calculator applications coach for 5 years. Then when I was at Valley View, my last few years there, at the high school, I started coaching number sense, calculator, math, and science. Then my last 16 years at Argyle, I coached all those there. At both places, our success clearly was because of the students. I had a lot of intelligent kids, very hardworking kids who just loved UIL competition. That was, for many of them, that was their favorite thing in high school, was UIL competition. During this time, I've had state champion teams and individuals in 1A, 2A, 3A, and 4A. The highest score I ever had of a kid at math at state was a young man named Ross Coker. He scored a 348 at the state meet. And my best team at the state meet was in 2012, I had a team that scored 894. And again, as I said, I know the success was due to highly motivated students, but it also was due to very involved parents. Both Valley View and at Argyle, the parents of these kids, they were very supportive. And really, a big part of the credit should go to the principals and superintendents, both at Valley View and at Argyle. I remember at Valley View, one day our principal called me into her office and she goes, "What can we do to get better at UIL?" And we had been getting a kid to state in math almost every year, and they'd usually place 5th or 6th, but we never got a team. And I made a couple suggestions to her that I thought would help, and the superintendent backed her on it, and within a couple of years, we started getting all our teams to state. So the administrators are a big deal. If you're fortunate to be at a school where your principal wants to do everything he can or she can to help you, and the superintendent supports that, that makes a huge difference. And I also understand that many people do not have as good a situation. And it always amazed me, the coaches that could get teams to state And when you talk to them, they didn't have near the support I had at Argyle. And boy, I just give those guys a lot of credit. Now, the reason I want to tell you that stuff is that I understand what it's like to coach at a very small Class A school. And David, could you move it up just a little bit? And I know the conflicts you have. These kids do every sport there is. They do ag competitions and all kinds of stuff. And you're just lucky that you can even get them to meets. And so I can relate to what you're going through. Also, at Argyle, when we reached 4A, we began to have some kids that this was their thing, and they had a lot of time to spend on it. And these were the kids who were pushing 300, breaking 300 on math. So I think I can relate to just about everyone from the Class A schools up to the bigger schools. Okay, what's going to stay the same on the UL mathematics test? Well, first of all, this was real important to Larry White. He said he wanted the test to always be accessible to younger kids, and I want to continue that. So I've made sure on every test that there's a bunch of problems that a young kid, maybe he's had Algebra 1 and geometry, maybe Algebra 2, there's plenty of problems that these guys can work on. And I also wanted to point out that they're not just on the front page. So if a kid works the first page and then page 2, it starts to get away from him, tell him not to stop there and just give up. Tell him to go through the whole test, because sometimes I know Larry did, and sometimes I'm going to, we're going to stick some very workable problems there toward the end. So tell them to keep reading. You never know when I'm going to throw in an easier Algebra 1 or geometry problem that they can make a real good attempt on. The second thing that Larry did, and I'm going to continue to do, is he wanted to reinforce what you're teaching in the classroom. The TEKS, the objectives that you have, he wanted to be sure there's lots of problems on the test that will reinforce what you're actually teaching. And I want to do that as well. And the third thing that's going to be the same is, if you've been doing this very long, you know Larry has some special things that he really likes. He likes base problems. He likes some special sequences, figure it numbers, mathematician, stuff like that. And I want to continue to do that as well. So those things are going to be the same. Oh, what will be on the test? I think it's fair game to ask you anything that's taught in the high schools in Texas. So any topic that's covered in Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, Pre-Calculus, AP Calculus BC, or AP Statistics, I want those questions to be fair game. I also am going to continue to put a few of those things that Larry White did that I really like. You're going to continue to see some base 16, base 14 problems, figure it numbers, pentagonal numbers, this type of thing, sequences. You know, some of his most challenging questions, he'd put in some really tough sequences there, and I want to continue to do those. Special numbers, perfect numbers, abundant numbers, things like that. Those are good. He had a list of mathematicians he liked, so I'm going to continue to do a couple of those guys. So those things are going to be on the test. David, if you can move it up again. I'm going to write a full 60 question test for the student activity conference, just to give you an idea of what my tests are going to look like. So whenever you go to a conference, pick up a test, that will give you a good thing to start analyzing with your students. What are some things that I think you as coaches can do to prepare for the test? Well, the first thing is, if your math teachers will do a really good job, and if they will teach as much of the textbook as possible, that will make your job easier. I know over the years at different places and talking to different coaches and stuff, sometimes the Algebra 2 teacher would only do 6 chapters, the pre-cal teacher would stop after chapter 6. And so they didn't always cover everything. So one thing I did at Argyle and the teachers really responded to is, sometimes like the Algebra 2 teacher would come to me at the end of the year and say, what topic do you really need me to do a better job of, or to spend more time with? And so I would say, could you work a little more on factoring, or could you work a little more on this? So I had good relationships with the other math teachers, and they really worked with me to try to cover all of the textbook. in any particular topics that I wanted them to really work on. Another thing you can do is with your students, you can just go over previous UIL tests. If you have some AP students, I'm going to try to work in a few problems that are similar to the way that the AP folks ask them, some conceptual type stuff. Another thing you can do with your students is to teach them to take full advantage of the calculators. So if you're like familiar with AP Calculus, you know, the third of the problems calculator active, and they have really clever ways of asking questions that rely on students knowing how to use the calculator and what it's doing for them. I was just talking to a coach last night, and I said it would be really good if you could sit down with your students and you could really hunt through the calculator and find out where it does this, where it does this, where it does this. And that is something students really like to do as well. They like to pull out the TI-89 or whatever, TI-84, and discover that these calculators actually do a whole bunch of things. So I hope to have some questions where it's really dependent, the student knows how to use their calculator fully. And then I think you can train your students to be selective, because no students or very few students are going to be able to read all 60 questions and be able to work on all 60 of them. So you might tell your students, look for the ones that you know how to do, the ones you're confident on, maybe the ones you're fastest on, and don't forget, go all the way to the end of the test. These ones might be on the very last page. And just as a place to start, I went through Larry's state meet test, and I just looked at the problems and then jotted down a few topics that I plan to continue for sure. And this is not a complete list, but it's a good place to start. On some of Larry's tests, you notice he would start number one with an equation or evaluate type problem. So solve equations of all types. When I looked at number three, this was some type of consumer problem. He likes to do stuff where you bought so many DVDs, you bought this, here's the tax rate. If you paid with a $50 bill, how much change you get? Yes, those are good problems. I want to continue with those. Then I noticed problem number 7 and number 34. You know, Larry likes to do a lot of stuff with polynomials, roots, product of the roots, some of the roots taken two at a time, this type of stuff. I want to continue doing that. He does a lot of stuff with factoring polynomials. He does a lot of expansion problems. I want to continue doing those. One thing Larry does that I really like is he presents tables, and you have to go through the table and pick the information out of the table to answer his questions. And one of his that he's done the last couple of years that I guarantee I'm going to continue to do is he would give you a table with some ordered pairs and stuff like that, and you had to decide, is this a quadratic regression, a cubic regression? What is this? And so I want to continue to do that, present tables, and expect to do a lot of regressions this year. Another thing he does, and this was kind of new the last couple of years, he's always put graphs and then asked questions about the graphs. But one thing he did I really liked the last couple of years, he would give you a graph of the derivative and then ask questions about the function itself, kind of like the AP folks do. And so I want to continue to do that type question. That was a really good question. Okay, and then number 10, he does a lot of surface areas and volumes. I want to continue doing that. Number 13, he always did a lot of function problems, maybe F and G, and then do F of G of X, F of G of 2, stuff like that. I want to continue that. Base problems, these are great. All kinds, fraction bases, add, subtract, multiply, divide with bases, all the way up to base 16. Those are really, really good problems. Want to continue with those. Sequences of all types, arithmetic, geometric, series of all types, same thing, arithmetic, geometric, also Fibonacci, Lucas, all those types of things that Larry likes, want to continue those. He puts geometry problems on every test. I want to do that. A lot of circle problems with chords, angles inside, angles outside, stuff like that. Algebra 1 problems, money problems are good Algebra 1 problems. Want to continue with those. Larry always had trig identities. Want to continue doing that. He had trig equations. Sometimes he'd want to know the solution. Sometimes he'd say, how many solutions between 0 and 2 pi? Want to continue asking those type questions. Number 23, one of his favorite types was recursive sequences. He might give you A1, A2, and A3 and ask you for A6. Want to continue with that. Number 25, this must have been one where he gave you a graph and you had to pick out some points off the graph to do a regression. So really know how to use your calculator, be able to know how to do regressions. You can do regressions without it, but in some cases, the calculator is probably the fastest. You may do it both ways with your students and see which way is more effective for them. For his graphs, sometimes he would give you the derivative and want to ask you questions about the function itself. So you know you're going to have to do stuff with derivatives and antiderivatives. Another type problem Larry asks all the time that I like are the bearing problems. And if he wanted to give you a tough one, he did this a couple times this year. He put a couple bearing problems with calculus on them. I thought those were really cool. So maybe I'll continue to do some of those. That was a great idea. I think that was pretty new, just the last year or two he did those. Special numbers, all kinds of things, pentagonal numbers, hexagonal numbers, stuff like that. Those are good. Larry often puts union and intersection type problems. Want to continue doing those. Lots of combinatorics, probability, want to stay with those. Those are really good. Some of his hardest problems involve those, so want to continue those. Larry also had many log equations, questions with log properties, want to do those. Another thing Larry started doing the last couple of years I really like is the approximation methods in calculus, like area under the curve with rectangles. I know when I taught calculus, we called them LRAM, MRAM, RRAM, and trap. So be sure your kids can do those. If they're in AP calculus, they have to learn those. If they're not, maybe you can teach them those. From calculus, also, Larry liked to ask the mean value theorem. Very good type of question. Larry asked a lot of questions with sinusoids. Some of these could be the trickiest. I remember one year there was a 6A kid who scored like 354, I think. And the only question on the whole test he didn't answer is one of those sinusoids, because they can be tricky and there's so many ways you can define a sinusoid. So those are great questions. They really make you think. Sometimes they can be a bit slow. Maybe some kids are faster than me on it. But that reinforced to me when that was the one problem he chose to skip, because those are the ones that slow me down probably as much as anything. Larry liked to ask critical points about minimums, maximums, points of inflection. Want to continue doing that. He also started recently questions about particle motion. So a lot of parametric, a lot of polar. So particle motion problems are very good problems. In AP Calculus, they're very important, so want to do those. Statistic problems, Larry's been asking mean, median, mode, range. He's been asking those for years. He started in the last couple of years doing some standard deviation and variance problems. Want to continue those. Probably add IQR and outliers to that list. And then if you're in AP Stat, going to start looking at a few things with t-testing and some of the various tests you go through, maybe some confidence intervals, a few of those. Reward the kids who are taking AP statistics and have a good understanding of it. Some other topics that just come to mind. Larry liked conic sections, and I do too. I'm going to do a lot with conics, directrixes, vertex, focus, things like that. Some good polar questions. Larry always asks a lot of good polar questions. Wanted to continue that. Parametric, I really like to see Larry start doing a lot of parametric the last couple of years. Want to continue that. One thing probably will be new is I want to add some three-dimensional geometry. If you teach pre-cal, like one of the very last chapters at the end is three-dimensional geometry, like distance from a point to a plane, stuff like that. So I want to do a little bit of that. One thing Larry added on his test last year or two were things with the logistic equation. So I want to continue that. Students need to know the logistic equation and, and the general solutions to the logistic equation. As it is, that's a requirement for AP calculus folks anyway. That is a question that's guaranteed to show up on the AP calculus exam. So I want to put it in UIL to help your kids get ready for that AP exam. Differential equations, it's one of my favorite things. So I want to find a way to have those. Euler's method, working on how to find a way to put those in there where it doesn't take a long time. I kind of like the way the AP folks do it. They may only have you do 2 steps and the steps are easy. And so it doesn't take you very long. So I want to do some of that. As I mentioned earlier, confidence intervals, p-values, things like that. Want to do those. Just as some final comments, really make full use of your calculator. Students love to figure out what can be done on the calculator. Maybe some of your sessions, you guys can all get together and brainstorm and say, how could we do this on the calculator? And then evaluate, is it faster to do on the calculator? Or am I just as quick if I figure it out on my own? Regressions I really like. Those are some of my favorite Larry White questions of the last couple of years. When he gave you a table and you had to do a regression or a graph, you had to do a regression. Really like doing those. So expect to see lots of regressions. I'd be good with your calculator solver. I know I'm partial to the 89 because you don't have to make a guess and it will find all solutions. I know some of the other calculators when working with students, I think it's the 84. You have to make a guess. And sometimes the guess has to be pretty close and it will give you one solution at a time. So I know the kids, they can get so fast on that, it doesn't make much difference, but be sure whatever calculator you have, the calculator is really good at the solver. I know with 89, we looked at stuff like, instead of use solve, sometimes the nsolve is better. It's also got something called csolve on there. And we also started using a lot of the when commands, telling it where to look. If you remember Larry's questions, says how many solutions are there between 0 and 2 pi? Well, in 89, you can command it to look between 0 and 2 pi, and it will list you all the solutions that are there. I'm sure you guys who have kids with 84, you can figure out something equivalent to that. But really work on your calculator skills, speeds kids up, can answer more questions. And again, as well, seeing a lot of tables, regressions, lots of graphs. Larry told me about some software called HandyGraph that makes really good graphs. And so I started making some rough drafts of my test, and I'm making a lot of use of HandyGraph. So that's what was on my mind. Do you guys have any comments or questions about what to see this coming year?
I do have a question.
Okay.
Will the font of the test be the same? Or are you going to use your own?
I would use my own font.
Okay.
Yep.
One question in the chat box. Will similar types of questions be in the same general area on each test?
Could be anywhere. Could be anywhere, not in one specific location. So read through the whole test.
On the confidence interval questions and the p-value questions, like for the college stats, they're given tables to find those values and not allowed a graphing calculator. So with those, are you strictly going to write them where they can use a graphing calculator and not need a table to look up values?
Most definitely. They will not need a table. So you'll need to spend time with your kids on how to use a calculator effectively on how to get the confidence interval and how to get the p-value. The calculator does it really fast, so that's a really nice calculator skill to have. That was a good question that actually has been on my mind as I've started writing tests, is how to do it since there's no tables. And I guess the two options are to just have the calculator pull it out, which is a really good skill. Another way is to do the AP stat type questions where it may not want the exact p-value or the exact confidence interval, but may ask you conceptually something about how to do it.
Well, and the next question is, doesn't it matter if it's a sample or a population also? So will we know that? Will it be very specific to one type?
Yes, sample. Going to do samples.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Type that in the chat or unmute if you prefer. All right, I'm not seeing anything else come through the chat. So Cliff, is there anything else you want to add at this point, or?
Just good luck. Hope your principal supports you, your superintendent supports you, and then you have some good, hardworking kids this next year.
All right, well, I will scroll back up here to the top so you can get that email address. This handout is also available on the web page. Oh, we had one question in the chat box. Will there be an example test on the UIL page? There is one there now. It's a couple of years old, but Cliff mentioned he's putting together a complete test for the Student Activities Conference. And so that will be, at some point in the fall, that will make that available as well. So that'll be a good example of that you can refer to. All right. Well, thank you all for coming this afternoon. As you can see, we're going to have, I think, great continuity with Cliff taking over for Larry as our new mathematics contest director, which is always very important to us. Question on the SACs. Will the SAC be virtual or face-to-face? We are planning for in-person student activities conferences this fall. It's going to take the UIL budget a little time to recover, so we may not be doing a full 4 as we have traditionally, but we are planning for the SACs that we're able to schedule to be in person. And we're still working on confirming host sites for those. So that will be posted on the UIL website as soon as we have that information. Let's see, one other question. Will you still write for TMSCA?
I'm writing a couple tests for TMSCA, I think 4 tests. They're going to have a new test writer to write all the other tests. It's a guy who's done a really good job. His teams have been really good the last few years, and so we think he'll do a really good job.
Anyone else with a question? All right. Well, thank you all again for attending the conference, and hope you have a great summer. And we look forward to seeing some of you at student activities conferences this fall, and then as we get into our spring contests in spring of 22, back to a normal schedule with in-person contests again. We're certainly looking forward to that. So if you have other questions, feel free to send us an email. Cliff's email address is on that handout. I'll go ahead and put it up one more time, but it is the handout is available for download. Here we go. Okay. There's that email address. And for those of you who work with the science contest, we have a session coming up at 4 o'clock today with our science directors, same Zoom link as you used for this session. And then tomorrow at 10 a.m., we have a session with Dr. Burrell, our state director for calculator applications. But thank you again for coming and for attending this year's conference, and hope you have a great rest of your week.